Casey's Coast to Coast.
Well, now it's time for this week's Casey's Top 40 Trivia Quiz, brought to you by 1-800-COLLECT. It's fast, it's easy, it saves. In 1990, Canadian singer Jane Child hit number 1 with her first hit in the USA. What's the name of that song? Don't Want to Be a Fool? Don't Want to Lose You? Or Don't Want to Fall in Love? The answer after this.
Chris Rock here talking about karma. You know what goes around comes around. The other day my man Steve calls collect, but my man didn't dial 1-800-COLLECT. And I'm like, you could have saved me up to 44%. He just started laughing. Then all of a sudden I hear boom! Seems a lightning bolt came out of nowhere, struck him dead in the foot, totally ruined his brand new sneaks. Remember that the next time you make a collect call. Dial 1-800-COLLECT and say the people you call up to 44%.
For long-distance call, savings based on 3-minute AT&T operator dialed interstate call.
Number 35.
The second of this week's 3 debuts is the first top 40 hit for a newcomer from Toronto, Canada. Singer Jane Child says both of her parents were highly accomplished classical musicians. They even taught music in their home. That meant that the house was always full of students. And Jane was one of her parents' prized piano pupils. She spent years learning to play Beethoven, Bartok, and Brahms. But one day, she heard some rock and roll on the radio, and that stopped her cold. She says rock was so powerful and uninhibited that it just hypnotized her. She had to have more. Now, though she still enjoys classical, it's rock that rules her heart. Here's Jane Child with Don't Want to Fall in Love.
Casey's Top 40.
From Hollywood, this is Casey Kasem. Well, now we're up to the brand new number 1 song in the USA on Casey's Top 40, and it's by a newcomer from Canada who says she once led a double life. You see, just a short time ago, back when she was struggling, trying to find a record deal, she had one simple philosophy. Either she was a musician or she wasn't. There could be no in between. Now that meant, unlike most new artists, she wasn't willing to work odd jobs to tide her over. She was determined to concentrate on just her music. As you might expect, things weren't easy. To get closer to the action, she moved from her home in Toronto to Hollywood. And there she lived off of very small savings in a very small rundown apartment. She earned pocket change by collecting and recycling old soda pop bottles and aluminum cans. Things were so tough, she often went hungry with nothing more than popcorn for dinner. Then suddenly things started to happen. She says she's still not sure how, but a demo tape she had cut for a small record company wound up in the hands of a number of the major record labels. They were all very interested in signing her, but none of that interest put any food on her table. That's when her double life began. You see, the record companies courted her like royalty, but she still lived like a pauper. She'd be flown first class to New York and London for meetings and chauffeured to luxurious 5-star hotels. But when the bellboy would take her bags up to the suite, she wouldn't even have enough money in her pocket to give him a proper tip. For months, while she was trying to decide which offer to accept, she was wined and dined in the finest restaurants. Then she'd go back to her dingy apartment and an empty refrigerator. One night after a sumptuous meal, she walked in, tried to flip on the lights of her apartment, and found that the power was turned off because she hadn't paid the electric bill. Finally, after all that whining and dining, she accepted an offer from Warner Brothers Records and made her first album. Just 7 weeks ago, the first single from that album hit the top 40. And this week, that very same single goes all the way to the top. The brand new number 1 song in the USA on Casey's Top 40 is Don't Want to Fall in Love by Canadian newcomer Jane Child.
American Top 40.
And another newcomer is right here at number 19. She's the singer from Toronto, Canada, who says, "My house was a music school." That's because her parents were both musicians. Her father played violin and her mother sang and played the piano. Their daughter, Jane, was taking piano and voice lessons by the age of 5. She was actually teaching other neighborhood kids by the time she was in junior high school. And when she was 12, she also sang in the children's chorus of the Canadian Opera Company and was accepted at the Royal Conservatory of Music to study piano. But Jane Child decided to become a pop prodigy instead. Her first hit went to number 2. Now this week it's at number 19. Here's Don't Want to Fall in Love.
Hi, my name is Jane Child, and you're listening to American Top 40 with The Shadow.
I'm Shadoe Stevens, AT40, and now the story of the singer who discovered everything she knew was wrong. Well, not really wrong, but she actually had to forget years of training. She's the singer from Toronto, Canada, Jane Child. Now, we've mentioned before that Jane grew up surrounded by music. Her father played violin and composed television and film scores, and her mother taught piano and also composed. And when young Jane studied piano, she was forbidden to play rock music. But she had a little transistor radio, and late at night in her room, Jane would lie awake and listen to the weak signals she'd pick up of rhythm and blues stations from across the border in Buffalo, New York. So she learned to love both classical and pop music. But classical was all she knew how to sing and play. So when she was accepted into the Canadian Royal Conservatory of Music to study piano, she dropped out to join a rock and roll band. But her schooling didn't end there. It was beginning all over again. She says, I had to unlearn everything I'd been taught about music. I knew how to read, but I couldn't improvise. It was an interesting transition. Well, Jane eventually started performing locally on her own and soon made a demo tape. And that tape eventually landed in the right hands in L.A. and New York, and the record labels were knocked out. She finally took the offer she liked best and signed with Warner Brothers. And the first single from that album spent 3 weeks at number 2. Now it's at number 23 on American Top 40. Here's Jane Child.
Now here's the answer to our question. In 1990, Canadian singer Jane Child hit number 1 with her first hit in the USA. The name of that song is Don't Want to Fall in Love. And that's this week's Casey's Top 40 Trivia Quiz.
Casey's Top 40.